As you know, we are here today to talk about something that to tackle the climate emergency, which is how is it that we're going to see individual change in their behavior to live in a more sustainable way. And a nudge in the right direction is trying to sort of provide some examples of ways in which this could happen in real life. So, as you know, climate change is one of the biggest challenges of our present time. The UK has recently hosted the Cooperation of Parties Summit, well known as COP26, and this is the most important summit in the world to talk about the issue and try to, provide solutions to climate change. And at COP26, it was stressed that behavioral changes is part of climate action. However, the question is this change where it should be? And probably not. And that's why we are having this discussion today. And we're, here also to provide some solutions or suggest some solutions to live in a more sustainable way. So, as I said, in this event, we will focus on nudge theory. Nudge is just a possible way to sort of influence individuals' behavior and try to move individuals into the right direction. For those who are not familiar with the idea of nudge, I'm not here obviously to deliver a lecture, but it's just any aspects of the choice architecture, so any aspect of the environment that basically is able to alter our behavior in a predictable way. This idea comes from a very famous book, which was written by Richard Thaler and Cass Sustained in 2008, which has changed the way we look at public policy, and also behavioral economics is one of the most important area of behavioral economics that kind of made some changes in the way we behave. Okay, so we're going to have a panel discussion. So here are the panelists with me, and we have a great panel today. I know that every moderator will say that, but I really mean this. And I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves. And if I can, I'll ask you to be concise and to explain who you are and why you're here. And I'm going to kick off. So as an example, and my name is Lori Barile. I'm an associate professor of economics. I have a genuine passion for behavioral economics and nudge theory because this is what I teach to my students and this is what I like to research. Okay, so Brett, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I'm Brett Willers. I'm head of climate change and sustainability for the City of Coventry. I had a similar role way back before Riera Summit. I was responsible for Cardiff. So I've done a lot of work with US cities and also the European Union I was one of the drafters of the Aalborg Charter, which is a charter for European sustainable cities. Thank you.
So hello, everyone. My name is Arianna Buratto, and I'm a PhD candidate at UCL, and my research is on behavioral economics and sustainable food consumption.
Hello, I'm Lorenzo Lotti, Associate Professor at UCL, Institute for Sustainable Resources. I'm Director of the Master in Economics and Policy of Energy and Environment, and Director of BEAT, which is a Behavioral Environmental Economics team. And thank you for the invite, of course.
And I'm David Chapman, Sustainability Champion here at the University of Warwick, basically working on all areas and aspects of sustainability, embedding it across the campus. Obviously, my interest in behaviour change is around behaviour change, and nudge is obviously part of that.
Thank you. Okay, so before we start with the panel discussion, let me just give you a little bit of an idea of how it's going to work. So I will have a discussion with the panelists. I'll ask them some questions, and then at the end of the panel discussion, if you want to ask questions, my colleagues, Bojana and Maxine, will go around with a microphone and you can ask questions. For those attending online this event, you can type your questions in the chat feature. And again, Maxine and Bojana will moderate the chat and make sure that we try to answer as many questions that you have. So before I ask you the first question, one thing that I wanted to mention is one of the things that really strikes me about climate change and individual behavior is that although individuals know that the problem is a serious problem, so they are perfectly aware about the problem, it seems that they don't feel like climate change is something that is on them. Okay, so you know that economists like to talk about numbers. So I'm just going to mention a couple of stats and then I leave the discussion with you guys. So there are a couple of reports that Europeans, for example, are perfectly aware about the seriousness of climate change. And just looking at the stats now, so 3/4 of them states that climate change is clearly a serious problem. But when it comes to asking them who is responsible for this problem, then only 4 in 10 Europeans say that choose you personally, okay, which means 41% of people believe that the problem should be solved at individual level. And even, more interestingly, the environment and climate change is in the 5th place of many concerns at country level. So it comes after health, the economic situation, price rises, inflation and cost of living and unemployment. Okay, so it's clear from these stats that when weighted against other problems, other priorities, such as jobs, family, and a comfortable lifestyle, climate change usually falls at the bottom. So I'm going to start this panel discussion asking Lorenzo and Arianna, why on the individual level are humans reluctant to do more to save the planet, even when they understand that it's a serious problem? And following this question, can you please tell us how nudge theory could help us to live in a more sustainable way? Thanks.
Should I start? Thanks, Lori. So behavioral economics is dealing with bounded rationality of individuals, right? So this is more or less what it's about. So the fact that individuals, according to evidence, individuals are not perfectly rational and they have some limitations in terms of attention, for example. In this case, if we look at climate change, we have different reasons, of course. The first one might be salience and tangibility. So we realize about climate change when there is a storm, when there are heat waves, and that's of course not the entire story. Of course, it's just a little fraction, right? But we realize about that when there are like these kind of climate-related events. Other situations, of course, might be related with the fact that we don't like to think about negative consequences, negative things, but also that if we use mental shortcuts to simplify reality, it's different to find a simple answer to a very complex problem. And so probably it's much easier not to do anything about that, not think about that at all. Should we comment on green nudges as well, or just this part?
Arianna, do you want to add anything to what Lorenzo has just said about behavioral science, or would you like to start answering the question about how nudge can help us to change individuals' behavior?
So maybe something that I would like to add is just that another problem that we often encounter is that people may feel like their action is not going to make a difference. And we call this low perceived behavioral control in behavioral science. So of course, like Lorenzo said, we may not want to think about the consequences, but we also may think that the action of a single individual is not going to make a difference. So we decide to avoid the problem altogether. And so green nudges are nudges that focus on changing our behavior in a way that makes it more sustainable. And green nudges can be used to tackle things like energy and water conservation, but also sustainable food diets, which is something my research focuses on. And green nudges can be things like changing the default option, so making sure that the sustainable option is the default one, so people will have to make an effort to switch away from it. Or things like, for example, putting sustainable food in a place where they're more visible in canteens. That way people can still choose to eat what they like, but they're more prone to choosing the sustainable option. So things like this can be considered green nudges, and we have a nice report by BIT on green nudges. And basically what they say is that nudges aim to do this. So they aim to make behaviors attractive and easy for people to do, social, so that people feel like everyone is doing the same thing and they're not different from everyone else, but also timely. So making behaviors attractive and social, but at the right moment, when people are prone to change their behavior and they're willing to try and change their behavior.
Thanks, Arianna. Lorenzo?
Yeah, and with all these green nudges, we are trying to address those barriers and limitations that we were describing before, right? So this way we try to increase salience, frame problems in the right way, try to address decisions coming from like mental shortcuts and which are not maybe considering the big picture, right? And the effects on the environment. So, yeah.
Okay, so before I move on, you must have realized that there is another panelist joining us. I think that there were some technical issues. Sophie, we didn't forget about you, but we didn't see you on the screen. So would you like to introduce yourself before I move on to the next question?
Thanks, Laurie. Hi, yeah, I'm Sophie Johnson. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi, yeah, so I'm Sophie Johnson. I'm Research Manager and Deputy Chief Analyst at Westminster City Council, and behavioural nudges is really essential to how we change behaviours. So much of what councils do is about changing behaviours, so the more we can learn from the academics and the science, the better.
Thanks, Sophie, and sorry if we didn't manage to introduce you before. I really apologize for that. Okay, just to follow up on something that Lorenzo and Arianna said, it is really about, small changes that individuals don't really think that make a difference. So one of the things that I've learned, for example, at COP26, is that these small changes can really make a huge difference. So I just want to give you an example of one of the things that I was quite impressed about, attending one of the sessions at COP26. We may not think that, for example, by washing our hands with cold water can really make a difference. Can you imagine, can you just, figure out how many emissions we can save in a year by washing our hands with cold water rather than warm water? Can you just tell me a number? Okay, I'll give you the answer, right? So apparently we can save something like the equivalent of the CO2 emissions that we produce by driving 285,000 cars in a year. So it's a huge amount of emissions, and we don't even think about how small things like this, or for example, avoiding or stopping rinsing the dishes before putting them in the dishwasher, could, how much water we can save by doing that. Or closing the tap when we wash our teeth, for example, or turning off the light when we exit a room, even if we have to go back, in 5 or 10 minutes. So it's these small things that can really make a difference in our behavior. So And COP26 has stressed the value of these minor little changes in our behavior as part of climate action. Now, what I want to ask to Brett and Sophie is from a local, so Lorenzo and Arianna, talked about some of the they talked about bounded rationality. So basically what behavioral science tell us about our limitations as humans, right? So can you tell us from a local authority perspective, what are the barriers to behavioral change? And how do you think a nudge could really help people to make these small changes to live in a more sustainable way?
Sophie, you want to start? Just being fair.
Sophie, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. So as I was saying, I think it's essential, really. And Westminster is such an unusual borough. We do like to think of ourselves as being a bit unique, but it is a very unusual place. So some of the barriers that we have to behavioural change, in terms of just sort of more traditional comms, is we have very diverse audiences. So in the 2011 census, we had the most diverse borough in the country. So a lot of different motivations, backgrounds, experiences, beliefs. We've got a very high throughput of residents. So a quarter of our residents move out within 2 years. So it's really hard to land messaging around recycling or other kind of local behaviours that we need people to do. Another problem we have is that we have a huge daily population. So pre-COVID, we had 1 million people every day in our borough, but only 220,000 residents. So that's a lot of people that we have to try and get them to do the right thing as they're going through their daily business. And then one more thing that I thought about as well was the physical constraints of the city. So, for example, we've been working with Lorenzo and Arianna about thinking about how we can encourage people to recycle who are in recycling in apartment blocks, but that's quite hard because we can't have the right kind of bins, and often it's not very easy for people and it doesn't make it simple for them, and so they might go for the kind of simplest scenario, which is not actually the most sustainable. Other things, we have lots of very historic buildings here, and that's really hard because they're protected and and very expensive to change. So it's really hard to motivate people to make those expensive changes to buildings and to adapt them. And other things like in the centre of London as well, we have had the highest air pollution in the UK, I'm sorry to say. This is partly to do with our location. So it goes back to like, well, this is my problem. What can I do about that? This is partly just to do with us being in London. We've got things like cabbies and delivery drivers, that's kind of changing the way that deliveries are done at the moment as well. It's quite hard to change people's understanding of how they're impacting on that. No one likes being told what to do by their council. So we have to think very carefully about our voice and when it's appropriate to use it and when it's better to use other influences or to use other brands.
Yeah, this is, thanks, Sophie. I think this is the last point you mentioned, people don't like to be told what they have to do. And that's where, for example, a nudge could help, because a nudge is not something, it's not a mandate, it's not something that we impose to people, but it's something that we introduce in the choice architecture without even telling them. So to make it, the sustainable choice, maybe the default option, so that they don't even realize what they are doing, but they are doing, the right thing at the right time. Would you like to add anything to?
There's quite a few issues around behaviour change and what the issues are. First thing I think is to think about people, about how they think and how the brain is structured. The human brain is adapted for dealing with immediate crises. So we're fantastic at running away from bears when they want to eat us, but we're completely useless at seeing something that is coming down the road gradually that we can rationally understand will be a problem, but we don't respond to. We cannot react in that way. And some of the things it's trying to understand that there are limitations in the way the human mind thinks, and that's probably not going to change. That's something we're going to have to live with and turn to deal with. Another thing is part of that is people don't realize what the impact they have, and it's difficult for them to assess that. We don't really give people the tools to do that. So to give you an example, a piece of work that we did, which was based on some work that was done in the Netherlands with an energy company called Vglen. When you get your fuel bill, You get it on a quarterly basis. And when you get it at the end of the quarter, you pay it and you forget about it to the next quarter. When you go shopping to buy food, you buy that weekly, and you usually have a good understanding about how much you spend, and you kind of budget accordingly. So we took a system where we actually reported degree day figures to people. That meant that they could understand if the temperature's really cold out there now, you are going to be using more energy. That's perfectly normal. That's okay. But people don't understand that. So we had to help people understand their consumption of their home energy on a weekly basis. So we reported in the local paper, this was done in Cardiff some years ago, and we worked with the New Economics Foundation on this. And we found that households participated on average during that 3-month period where we ran the initial pilot. We found they made a saving of £20 per household on average. So there's simple things that people can do if they're conscious of it. So it's about raising that consciousness and awareness and helping people to do that. And that's not an easy thing. The other thing is around choice design, making it fun, making it interesting, or realizing that the thing that motivates the person is not about the environment, it's something else. So to give you an example of something that was incredibly successful, not environmentally related, but from a health perspective, was major. When we're trying to get people to stop smoking cigarettes, we were telling people about how it affected their lungs and how harmful it was and all of those things. And one would think rationally, well, if you know that and you see a picture of a dirty lung, you're going to change your behavior. But if you're a young person, you often think, oh, I'm going to live till so long, it doesn't matter, I'm going to be all right. The another thing in the campaign that worked the most, the best, most effective campaign, was the one that said, you don't smell very nice, you stink of cigarettes. And if you go out with your girlfriend, you're not going to smell too good. That had a much bigger impact in changing behavior than anything else. So energy efficiency in the home, try to get everyone to put loft insulation. Even when you're giving people money to do so, they don't do it. Why? You have to try and understand the reasons behind it. One major reason was that most people in their homes have a shed load of stuff stacked in their lofts in their houses. And the thought of moving all that contents of your loft out to put insulation in is just beyond the thought. But if you say, we will do that for you, and we will put it in secure storage whilst we put the insulation in, and we will put it all back for you, would you want us to do it then? And most of the time, people do. So now in many programs, we incorporate that as a basic factor in the cost. It costs us more to do, but we know that that makes it easier for the person. And similarly, when we did recycling in Cardiff, we used a green bag, one bag. Everything that was recyclable went into one bag. You don't have to sort it. You just put it in the bag and you put it outside and we'll sort it for you. We have far greater participation rates in our city than there are in other cities which ask people to sort. In addition, our staff were more effective at sorting than the public were anyway, because they knew all the types of plastic. They knew the plastic industry codes. They could understand it. So they could get a better quality of product that gave us a better financial return. So there's simple things there that made it easier for people to do, but recognize that there are other factors that affect people's behavior. And those are the kind of things that we need to focus on and get smart with. It's about looking at those, what are those hooks? What are those triggers that affect that behavior?
Thanks, Brett. David, would you like to add something on this?
Yeah, I mean, at Warwick, we've got the same sort of issue as I think Westminster. Obviously, we've got a yearly turnover within accommodation, and we've got about 7,000 rooms across campus for students, or maybe 7,500 now. And then overall, obviously, we've got a turnover of students of every 3 to 5 years, depending on degree. So we've got a good number of students that we have to educate again and again and again. So we've got all sorts of projects, and we've done various nudges. Some of them have just been trials, and hopefully we can get those in as permanent solutions at some point. I don't know whether you want me to go on to some of those at all.
Yeah, you can give us some examples.
Yeah,
maybe
so
they don't know, but they experienced the nudge before.
Yeah. So we run a project called Cut the Flow, which is an energy and water saving competition, and that's providing information our nudges. As part of that, we've started providing information to Sherborne and TOESL, basically on a 2-weekly system with posters, a bit like Brett was saying about earlier, basically giving flats information about how much they're using compared to other flats, and you get a kind of a sense of social norming there, and understanding actually I'm using quite a lot this week or past 2 weeks compared to basically every other flat in the area, so reducing there. We've also run nudgeathons as well through the university, so looking at what we can do as well in halls. So we've done various projects around heating, giving people information, little labels with their thermostatic radiator valves, so that they know when they come in, beginning of the first term, set it to 3, and then decide from there whether to turn it up or down, as well as looking at water usage as well. And that's connected obviously to the heating, as Laurie mentioned earlier. So reduction of shower times, so sticking shower timers in showers in Sherborne as well, so that people can time their showers and the length of those, so as to reduce that time. So that saves water and heating as part of that. Also in my previous job, I also worked on a community energy saving project, also working with people and adding installation in behavior change and just educating and nudging people through that education. We saved, I think, about £62,000 across 350 houses just on electricity, let alone the gas, just by offering advice and educating that way. And one of the things that we did find is that one of the other issues with getting people to insulate their homes sometimes is just when you say it's free, some people are taught that nothing is free. So trying to give them something for free can sometimes be really, really, really difficult.
Thanks, David. I think you, in answering this question, you all raised a key issue here, that people need to be educated because they don't really understand the consequences of their behavior. And this is actually one of the things that was really stressed at COP26. So my next question is, what is the role of education in behavioral changes? And can you please tell us a bit more about the projects you have developed in your institution, and explain how you use them for students to benefit? And this question is for Lorenzo and Arianna.
So when it comes to behavior change interventions, we know that education on its own doesn't often work. So for example, like it was said before, even if you tell people that smoking is bad for you or similar things, they're not going to change their behavior. So there often needs something else that accompanies educational interventions. So, and as far as educational activities and behavior change and sustainability, Lorenzo runs this module, which is on behavioral economics, game theory for the environment, and him and I, as the TA, we organized a behavioral marathon for our students. So basically what we did is we had Hubbub, which is a charity in London that deals with sustainability issues, come and talk to the students about real problems they're trying to solve every day, for example, littering. And we asked our students to think about solutions that could be implemented in order for the littering to stop, or at least for people to not litter as much. And the very nice thing about this is that students had concrete examples that they could think of and work on. And we also know that behavioral interventions need to be time-specific and location-specific. So there's a lot of things to take into account. And this gave students an opportunity to actually think about where the problem was happening and who was responsible for the problem. And it was great. It was a great opportunity to share ideas and learn a bit more about what we teach and what we learn at uni can be applied, and how it can actually work to change people's behaviors.
Thanks, Arianna.
And yeah, so if we think about university as having an educational role, I like to think it in a broader way. So as BEAT, we also do lots of like external engagement activities. We went for seminars at Westminster and other international organizations as well, like Flora and Fauna International, etc., etc. And we try to combine, to bring the education beyond the borders of university, of course, and higher education in its own, but continuing maybe on the same path. One thing that we try to do is applying a certain research-led teaching perspective with students in the university. So some of our students have created their own nudges, have run their own experiments, even on campus. One example that I have in mind is when we piloted this nudge on recycling, comparing, of course, buildings that were treated with the nudge and buildings that weren't treated with the nudge. And nudge consisted in specific stickers on the bins that were like increasing the level of information provided, but also salience, motivation. So there were some combined effects there. And in this way, you combine, of course, the theory that you learn with like applied skills. You learn how to inform yourself about the research around. You learn how to develop the nudge, and then to make a difference later when you are in a job place or somewhere else, or you're working as a researcher. And of course, students have lots of fun. I think they improved the recycling quality by 35%. So that's an astonishing result across 2 months' time. But surely they did a wonderful job. They were very glad to do that. And of course, they also got great grades as a final dissertation, which is always important.
Thanks, Lorenzo. Brett, Sophie, and David, would you like to add anything about the role of education in a broader sense? So educating, for example, employers or companies, or not just talking about the students and the youth, but also, adults and the adult population. Do you want to add anything? Is there any initiative in your institutions that you want to talk about with respect to educating people?
I was at a meeting not too long ago with a number of environmental activists in the city who were talking about, it's the future's the young people. And I duly reminded them that actually someone said that to me when I was a youngster, when I was campaigning against CFCs and the like. And I was thinking, if we keep doing that, we're just kicking the can down the road. It's a nice way of avoiding responsibility. You pass it on to the next generation. And we're still seeing it today. So that's one feature. As one who used to run the Environmental Education Centre in South Wales, where the pit closures were going on, actually in the South Wales valleys, I'm quite familiar looking at young people about how they think about things and how they become adults. I think we have to look at that whole thing, because these are the people that are the adults of today. So those young people I worked with then. And the beauty of it then was that my centre, I worked with children from primary, nursery, all the way up to university students. I had at the centre, I had the whole mix. And I used to see some students as they developed. And I noticed that there were several things about the educational system that caused the problem. So when you're in primary school, you look at things in a holistic way. You make relationships between subjects. You understand that. As soon as you get to secondary school, we separate the subjects away from one another. They become isolated. So our thinking starts to become isolated. And when you talk about the issues that we're talking about now, actually, we need to be holistic thinking. We need to be seeing that doing that actually has a really adverse effect on the economy and jobs. Now, people are beginning to see that now. They're beginning to understand the relationship between the environmental issues and jobs. So when we talk about businesses are beginning to understand that. Large companies, if you see the number of people, executive level, that they now have that have responsibility for sustainability, there's a large number of doing that. And I have conversations, very mature conversations now with people in industry, because they get that. They understand that relationship between those things. But the general public don't at the moment. The other thing that the education system doesn't do, which is not helpful, is that it doesn't teach us to be active citizens. I did a lovely project in South Wales where the newspaper article said about how much litter children dropped in the street and what a problem they were. So I said to the kids, let's do a survey of the area around your school and see whether that's true or false. So we measured and quantified, collected all the materials, and actually most of it was adult waste. It was drinks cans, like alcohol lager, cigarette packets and the like. So it was adult debris, it wasn't young people's debris. And we got them to call in the council leader, and they gave a presentation, provided all the statistics and information, and duly got an apology. They also got the litter bins lowered so they could actually reach them and use them. And it taught them something, that actually you can campaign for improvement if you do your research and understand that. And those are kind of key things that we don't get children doing. So a number of times I've been to secondary schools and they're told about recycling, but actually you look around the school itself, there's nothing there to help them do the recycling. So how are they going to believe that? Unless they actually see doing the walk, walking the talk sort of thing, that's walking the walk, isn't it? They say. So there's a real issue around this. And the other issue is that politics, and it was true that President Trudeau of Canada said, there's no lollipops in sustainability, because sustainability goes beyond a 5-year term of an election. So there's another issue there around how do we bring that within a political debate, which will affect those changes. How do we bring in a long-term view and get a value for that makes it worthwhile for a politician who maybe only lasts for 5 years? So there's some real issues around those things about how do we affect change. And the last thing I'd like to say and mention, we talk about nudge theory, but we have the mavens, and they do the concepts. You have people who have a knowledge of things that take, they're usually the first people to buy a new product. If they get electric cars, they're the first to go out and buy them. They know the ins and outs about them. But we don't use those people to mobilize other population to make people aware. And the other people in society are those that have connections to everyone. Now, we did a piece of work in Birmingham where we used people who had connections to lots of people to provide communication and information. Who were those people? There were hairdressers, barbers, taxi drivers, people who had time to spend talking to people either in transit or whilst they're having their hair cut. Think about who is it that you can use to communicate messages to people. We did that particular example was around a community safety issue, and a senior police officer and myself had both read the Nudge book. We thought, how can we apply this? And we actually used it to great effect in dealing with encouraging people to report issues to the police. But it was a nice example. You can do the similar things with environmental messaging.
Thanks, Brett. Sophie, would you like to follow up on what Brett has just said?
Yeah, I think it just made me think about not making assumptions about people and not making assumptions about how people are motivated and what they actually do as well, like thinking about the school children example. There was an interesting subject that we looked at a few years ago with Lorenzo's student. She did a test with Westminster City Council employees and asked us all how good we thought we were at recycling within Westminster. So we all marked how good we thought we were. And then there was a test and it showed various different typical products, the type of thing that Westminster City Council employees throw away. And we had to say whether you could recycle it or not. And at the end, we found out almost all of us had overconfidence in our recycling. And it's just that assumption like, oh, and I know what I'm talking about, council people, they know what they're doing. And it was presented at a symposium to, lots of staff. And it was quite amusing to see which floor was the worst offender at being overconfident recycling. And it was a fun activity, but it really got us all thinking. Like I was overconfident myself, and I'm such a recycling, person. I'm always going around fishing things out of bins and telling people off. So it just, I think it goes back to what you're saying before, just don't make assumptions. But on the education side as well, I think that salient messaging is really important too. So I mentioned before about us having the worst air pollution in the country. So we did a campaign a few years ago called Don't Be Idle. And it was about just reducing it, just switch your car off, don't leave it idling, because that's pumping out air. And we're trying, like, how can we get this message across? And in the end, we did a thing with balloons, filling up balloons. So one of the team worked out that 150 balloons are filled a minute if you leave your engine running. So we did this campaign showing the balloons, and it was so horrifying when you realize that just 1 minute of leaving your engine running is pumping that much cyanide and PM 2.5 into the air. It was really horrible. And another thing they've done recently, which is a sort of similar vein, which is about carbon. And I guess it's like trying to get people to get their heads around carbon, because we've declared a climate emergency at Westminster. So we're going to have the whole city carbon zero by 2040. Now, how the heck we're going to do that, changing this diverse, changing population all the time. But one thing we did recently was to have this enormous balloon which showed a ton of carbon, just to show what that looks like and what you'd have to do to save that, and how we all need to get amongst it. So yeah, I think the education has to come alongside the nudge techniques.
Sophie, David, I saw that you were really keen to add something on this question, so please.
Yeah, I think from the education side, obviously including everybody is incredibly important. We've got students at Warwick who do both work in WBS, economics, and also psychology, all working on various areas of nudge theory and doing projects with us. So we've done projects in the past, like students giving away reusable mugs or bottles, like water bottles, so as to nudge people into using them, having them pledge. Also, I'm not sure if we still have it, but we at least used to have a society, which is WBIT, Warwick Behaviour Insights Team, and basically a group of students looking at various nudges that we can do around the campus. So one of their outputs was putting stickers on a lot of the switches around campus with like little hearts on them, and when you switched light on, it would essentially break the heart. So little nudges like that. Also through things like through those projects we do with global sustainable development as well. We've been doing more and more projects with external groups, and even actually within departments in the university as well, so as to look at what they can do and take that holistic view with them. A lot of people in sustainability, kind of up to a point, are people that didn't get educated in sustainability. They've been brought over from other departments, put in the role and gone, you're closest to it, go do the thing. Whereas the people coming in now have had the education around sustainability, and you've got that far more kind of embedded in their way of thinking and in the holistic thinking. So it's really important to, in businesses, ensure that comes through, and also for businesses to use that knowledge where it is coming through as well, I think. But there is also just a lot of work that universities can do. We use the universities as I've sort of mentioned there, as what we call a living laboratory, trial and testing things on campus so that we can then export them beyond the campus for other people to use.
Thanks, David. We talked about the role of education. We talked about the role of individuals to fight this battle. And now I'm going to ask a very, let's put it this way, hot question to the panelists. So I mentioned before that people think that it's not on them, okay, to solve the problem of climate change, or to, solve this issue about sustainability and live it in a more sustainable world. Guess who they think that should solve the problem? The government. Okay, so my next question is, what do you think about the role of government in this discussion in climate change, fighting climate change? What is the role of government and companies, if you can add something on this as well? Yeah, Brett, you can start if you want.
Yeah. Okay. So the National Audit Office very recently were asked by the Environment Audit Committee to look exactly at the point of the role of local government in relation to central government. And did central government see local government having a really important role to play? And if so, what was it doing to support local government in doing that? So the National Audit Office found that, yes, central government did see local authorities having a really important role to play. I was involved in the Habitat 2 program in the UN, representing local government in Istanbul way back. And it was clearly evident that a lot of the things on the ground that you've got to do have got to be done at a local level. They're going to make a difference. So local authorities have a key role to play. What the National Audit Office found, though, was that central government didn't have a clue and had not got anything in place, and still does not really have anything in place to support local governments in doing its role in taking that responsibility. I think central government's got several key roles to play. It needs to give the resources and make them available to local authorities and other bodies to actually enact things on the ground within local localities. It needs to do it in such a way that allows them to do them in a flexible way that suits the communities in which they're based. It's a really important issue. I think it's not something that's universal and you apply it everywhere. You apply it to the circumstances of the area that people are within. The other aspect is really around providing the research and the support and the data that tells us what's going on. So, for example, at the moment, a lot of the data we use for our CDP review for local authority is 2 years old. From Bayes, it's 2 years out of date. We're working on data that's way out of date. We're all doing it. It's perfectly normal. It's okay. But actually, wouldn't it be nice to have something that's up to date and them to understand that we need this information? And maybe then there's the aspect of making it responsible for energy companies and the like to provide us with that information. So we're just doing a project in Coventry called RESO, and we paid about £16,000 a year, because it's a one-off pilot, for some data that told us exactly every household's energy usage over a period of 6 months. We have an incredible detailed picture now of how people are using energy across the city. Now, government could make that quite easy for us to have without having to pay for it or try and beg, steal and borrow for that information. They could make that easily possible through legislation. Similarly, they could easily make changes, and this is where the economics comes in, putting in fiscal measures, tax incentives and the like to encourage the positive behaviours. And we don't do enough of that. And there's plenty of things that could be done to do that, which would make life so much easier for local authorities and their partners to do things on the ground. So that's a key role where local government has to play. It has to enable and facilitate the local actors to make the difference, to mobilize their communities and to make that change.
Thanks, Brett. Lorenzo.
I will try to link this on with citizens and the European citizens that answer the question. So following up on what Arianna was saying, the importance is at individual level to make choices easier, right? So of course, the government has an important role in with the changing the infrastructures, changing the adding default options, making things easier to help the citizens make their decisions, right? So that's very important. There is a recent report from Bayes done by BIT on this. They divide like interventions in 3 areas, like high stream, midstream, and low stream. And the high stream is like the interventions and behavioral component that can be done from the government and local and central authorities. And what they say is that this is possibly the most important part on which someone should focus on. In reality, of course, everything is really important, and also European citizens are very important, because at the low stream, of course, you can be nudged, you can take your decisions as citizen, but one of these decisions, for example, is voting, not only for the local authorities, but then also for central government. etc. So let's say that this river has a stream, like it's upstream, midstream, and low stream. But of course, I mean, it can go upside down at some point, right? So I understand the answer, but probably it's not only the government that is responsible for this.
Yeah, and I can't agree more. Sophie, would you like to add something on the role of government?
Yeah, I mean, we've just released this month our Zero Carbon City 2040 Westminster Climate Emergency Action Plan. There's a big programme meeting yesterday, and there's so much work to do. It's unbelievable. I mean, we've got a very motivated workforce who care passionately about this, but my goodness me, there's an awful lot to do, and so much of it is going to come down to behaviour change. And the thing that we're really worried about is 80% of our emissions come from buildings, and to adapt the buildings in Westminster, I mean, it's where to start. I mean, going back to what you were saying before about the data, you know, I've just employed a climate emergency analyst, like a carbon specialist, and he's trying to get data from all over the place. We're having to pay for it. We're having, you know, you have to have people that know exactly what to ask for. And there's so much greenwashing as well. So councils are kind of being offered all these amazing kind of, you know, how to reach your targets. Well, how do we know who to go for? How do we not waste public money? You know, this is such an important thing at the moment as well, with having all of our spending reduced and the spending review. I mean, I just think we're so lucky we've got analysts at council, we've got a lot of, you know, really good people, but we are worried. And, you know, and if we can't start to identify which buildings we need to change first and who owns them, that's another thing about ownership information. Where do you get that? Land registry, you know, it's a lot of work, and government could definitely help more. Oh, another thing is things like heat pumps. We've just put a heat pump into our house. We couldn't get anyone to fit it for us. My husband has to fit it himself. Lucky that I've got a physicist for a husband. But what do most people do about that? They want to get it, but they can't get it. You know, the green homes grants and that kind of thing. We need help for sure.
Thanks, Sophie. David?
Yeah, I think it's everyone basically. It's individuals and governments, but governments do have a strong part to play. I mean, one of the things that isn't happening and should be happening far more is we've mentioned it a few times around the education, the nudging, and actually, if we pre kind of the COVID period, governments were saying, "Oh, well, we can't do this, can't do that; it'd be too difficult." And actually, COVID showed that we can. And one of the things that we could do is put the money that they've been pouring into education material about washing your hands and wearing masks and things. If we poured that money into sustainability and the education around that, and you wouldn't even have to pour money into it. I mean, obviously you need a couple of people to run a social media, but if a lot of councils and government have free social media, so that could be used as well. I think there's a lot of work for government to do to make it easier to remove those barriers that we've got, and just making the choices simpler for people. There's just basically a sweet shop of choices at the moment, and people get very confused as to which is the best thing to do because the subject is not straightforward. So removing some of those choices to make it okay, these kind of top 5 choices are the most sustainable way to go, would I think be incredibly useful, and government can do that at that level.
Thanks, David. Thanks, everyone. I'm conscious of time, so I just want to see if anybody in the room or in joining online has any question.
I have a question, please. Like, for example, the environmental issues are very neglected nowadays in many countries, especially the developing countries. The problem is that the pay attention for environment is really expensive. So how can we make it more economic feasibility? Like, for example, using plastic bags is much cheaper than using fabric bags, for example. Or even recycling is not efficiency. When we do recycling in our countries, it's cost much and it's not really useful. It's more expensive than transportation and move this plastic to the recycle plants. So this is the problem. How can we make the environmental things more affordable, and how can we convince people to pay attention for environment? Yeah, thank you.
Who wants to
I-
take
I-
this question?
I'll start and then possibly pass to Brett on this one. We'll give him a moment to think on it. But I think this is where Brett's kind of mention of government level and local level come into play. You can see a lot of projects happening across the world where people on a local level are sorting the issue themselves. They're kind of taking it off their own onto themselves. They set up businesses around sorting the problem. At the same time, governments could be taking more of a role and helping to implement strategies just across the countries as well. So I think it's a bit of a mixture. I think at least with the local level, as Brett said, people know the ins and outs at a local level, so can implement changes. And things are going to be different everywhere. Okay, some places plastic bags might be the best way to go, but other places it'll be different. Everywhere's got their own different cultures, also different supply demand. So there's going to be different answers. It's not going to be a one answer fits all, and we have found that through trying to do things at Warwick, but also you see people trying to copy and paste nudge theories from one country to another, and it doesn't always work. There is, I would say, a different culture in the UK compared to that of most European countries, especially if you go to a place like Copenhagen, for instance. There's a much different mentality there than there is in the UK. So you can't just copy and paste the theories, and you have to change them slightly.
Yeah, so Sophie mentioned the difficulty of getting someone to do heating when he wanted to do heat pumps. There's a real big issue at the moment in the UK where we're trying to do energy efficiency in homes, and this is where you've got to think holistically. So don't think of just the environmental issue here. Think about the sector that you're working with, the contractors you're working with, and their knowledge and awareness. And what's their age profile? So most heating engineers are kind of 40 years plus, been in the business for quite a while, very reluctant to take on new things often. The reason I say this, many times back with gas condensing boilers were the environmentally sensitive thing. And I had to literally, I think I must have spoken to about 20 contractors before I finally got someone that would do the work. Now, if you take the government at the moment, it's just winged millions of pounds to do energy efficiency in homes. The contractors have got two options. They can expand and employ more staff, has a risk attached to it, train them so they can use the new technology and know how to use it, or they could just simply increase their rates and make more money, make with fewer products, but still they've got guaranteed income. And that's exactly, the latter is exactly what's happening at the moment. So we've had meetings with BEIS and others. There's been 69 authorities sat down in a virtual table with BEIS and said, look, have you stopped to think about basic market economics here? If you've got supply and demand, you've created the demand, but actually you haven't got the ability to meet that demand. What are the people going to do? They're just upping the price. So you're spending more public money on doing less work. Where's the focus on the contractors and changing their awareness and working with them and helping them to see the market opportunities they have and the opportunities to expand their businesses. Because there's been no focus on that at all during this period of time, absolutely none. Similarly, another big one I'd like to everyone to be aware of, I've had an interesting number of conversations I've had with mechanics. Of course, they're dealing with petrol diesel vehicles. Can they do electric vehicles? Very few do. Many of the ones I've spoken to say, by the time it gets to those, I'd have retired. So we already know now that we've got a major issue around having enough engineers to be able to service electric vehicles. So you've got to think in that holistic way. You've got to think of the big picture, and all the components need to be addressed. So it's not just about changing people's behavior to get them to take up energy efficiency. It's about changing the behavior, the market, the way in which contractors work, the heating engineers. All those things have to be done as well at the same time. And you need to be thinking that holistic way. At the moment, people aren't. I mean, local authorities are, but at the moment, central government isn't, and that's a big problem.
And just to add to that, I think that's exactly where the issues with, for instance, we were supposed to have a zero carbon homes bill, 2016, which should have come in, and then I know a number of companies went bust because they went into all the effort of training their guys up and getting prepared for the change, and then the government a month before decided to just change its mind. I know a number of companies went under because of that. You also got the recent low Green Homes Grant, that's the one,
yeah.
and also the Green Deal, which I worked on a number of years ago, and basically one project after another just failing to do what it's supposed to because you don't have the supply chain sorted for the demand that's coming along. With the Green Deal, I think we only achieved about 400 Green Deal projects across the UK, partially because the government decided it was a good idea to put a 6 to 9% interest rate on it. And I believe Germany did one at roughly the same time and got about 360,000 going with a 1% interest rate. And it was obvious from the off in the UK that was going to be a major problem, as well as the supply chain to actually implement it. So it needs to be holistic and it needs to be thought through throughout the whole thing. I believe one of the issues with the most recent scheme was just they hadn't thought about paying the suppliers and actually getting that process through. So the suppliers was kind of ended up taking a risk and going bust in many cases. So you've got to have remove the barriers where you can, but also put the support in as well to actually have it achieve its goal.
Yeah, and I think that the government, science, and science here probably have the main role. Do we have any time to answer a question from the...
We've got an online question.
Yeah.
So is nudging compatible with democracy? Surely the very nature of nudging, subconscious, implies a departure from informed consent.
Well, was that informed consent?
Yeah. Yeah. A departure from informed consent.
A departure from, all right. Well, let's just think. We use nudge all the time. Every day in our lives, it's being done to us by various corporations to buy their products. It's called advertising, isn't it? I mean, a lot of it, but it's very effective at getting us to do things which we willingly do. So it's about using that mindset, that philosophy, to good purpose. In fact, you mentioned Westminster. I used to work for Food for Life, and I was head of Food for Life for London. So I remember in Westminster, we had a number of schools where simple things, for example, putting fruit in accessible locations. So when children were going to buy their food for lunch, putting the healthy options up front, making them close to them, so they saw them first. They could still pick the unhealthy option, but the healthy option was more accessible, more prominent. Dagenham did a thing where they actually gave award points. So every time children bought things like fruit, they got extra bonus points. So they got a card that they used to buy food, like a credit card. A lot of local authorities use that as a simple way of processing payments for food. And what they did was incentivize the healthy options so that children could go for those, and they would, could buy a CD or something at the end. I don't think that's undemocratic. I think that's a positive thing that's giving people a choice and rewarding positive choices. I think that's a really positive, really good thing to do. The other thing is also make things, I think, really fun and maybe a bit off the wall. So one I love is Surfers Against Sewage, the most successful environmental organisation in its time. And you wouldn't believe, but it had people aged over 50. I'm sure a lot of them didn't do surfing, but they did some incredibly mind-blowing kind of campaigns that were kind of bit in your face, like inflatable excrement, for example, carrying it around on beaches. It's like, oh my goodness. But it had an impact on people. It made people aware of the issues. It did, and it's a kind of advertising, and in this case, it kind of showing the adverse side of things, but it did affect people's behaviour. Why was that organisation so powerful? Why did it have so many members, and why did it manage to have such an effective blue badge scheme for beaches? It was very effective at doing that because it used very good kind of marketing, advertising. Got into people's imaginations, or very direct, very visual. Similarly, like Lynx, what it did with the fur campaign. So sometimes those sorts of things have a real effect on people's behaviour. That's not a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think we call it libertarian paternalism, right? So you still give the choice, and you don't modify the options that the individuals have. So if they want to choose something which is wrong for them, maybe they are completely free to do that. But this doesn't change like the democracy dynamics, right? The democratic dynamics. As an example, in this country, there were very low rates of people where like they were having pension schemes, right? They were like enrolled in a pension scheme. So thanks to just changing the default option, this number increased dramatically. And of course, this is absolutely, they still had the same options, but of course, the only thing that was in play there was like limited attention and inertia, which is nothing like rational that we do, but also something else. The low percentage of people enrolled in pension schemes was also correlated with education. So of course, if for like inertia and other bounded rationality mechanism, people which are less educated are less likely to get into pension, that is not democratic at all. So I would argue the opposite, if I may.
I also would like to add an example. So it was mentioned before that these things are already happening for marketing reasons. And Lorenzo and I went to Waitrose a couple of years ago, and we said to them, we would like to do a research project here, and we would like to put the most sustainable items where people can see them the most. And we were told, no, we can't do that because brands pay a lot of money to have their products displayed here. So the truth is, these things are already happening, but for a different reason, generally for profits. But it's important to be aware that all the options are still there, and these things are already happening. So effectively, nudging is not necessarily something new. Not necessarily something new, and it's something that can bring benefit to people, keeping in mind that we can still choose what we like at the end of the day.
I think the main issue is related to the idea that somebody else is kind of deciding for you what is the right option that we should choose. And so, there's also an ethical aspect behind it. And I think that this question is kind of trying to, stress this aspect. But the government is already doing these things, again, for many, for what we call in public finance, merit goods. So education is an example. There's a limited, there's a limited amount of education that every individual needs to take, because we want to have people to have at least some level of education. So I think that, nudge is not preventing us from being democratic, and it's just a different way to think about what we should do in the right way. Okay, so I don't know if you want to add anything, Sophie.
Just going to say we're a conservative council, so there's a political element to this as well, about not telling people what to do. There's something to take into account in government.
Okay, is there any other question that you want to ask? Yeah, there is another question. Do you mind to stay for 5 minutes, 5 additional minutes?
Sorry, where was it?
It's there. Oh.
Oh, thank you. So I want to ask, like, what's the strength of nudge in comparison to other policies or regulations that has been adopted for tackling environmental problems?
To be honest, I didn't hear
get
the. I had problems to understand the question. Sorry, I didn't hear you. I don't know if you.
I think what's the strength of nudge against other
Yeah.
approaches?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I go first here? And okay, so so I guess we can sort of link your question with the idea: is a nudge better than a mandate? Okay, so shall we tell people what to do in introducing fines or subsidies, or is a nudge better than these monetary incentives? Well, research. I answer the question based on what the research is telling us. I'm sure that Sophie and Brett have something else to say about what's happening, in real life. But research has told us that individuals don't like to be controlled, and normally a nudge is not perceived as something as like trying to control individuals, because you still leave them free to choose what they like to choose. Okay, so it's just making it easier for them to go for the sort of right option to choose, but you're not forcing them to do that. If you impose a tax or a fine, or you give a subsidy, research has taught us that sometimes individuals perceive this as a way to control them and their behavior, and so you're not acknowledging, the relevance of their behavior or what they are doing, but you're trying to control them to do something that the government wants them to do. And so I think that in terms of, I don't think that we can judge on what is best to do, because I still believe that, for example, green taxes could play a role here. I mean, fighting the climate emergency that we face nowadays. So it's just about using different instruments that we have that can help us to change a little bit our behavior and achieve this net zero target. So I wouldn't say that one is superior to another. Research is telling us that sometimes monetary incentives don't achieve exactly what they should achieve. So there was an interesting paper, I can't remember now when it was published, I think 2011 by Rustikine, and this paper was about a fine is a price. So basically they did a field experiment. It's a quite interesting example. They did a field experiment with parents picking up their children in school, and they were finding, parents picking them up late. And actually, so they wanted obviously to change their behavior and stop, arriving late to pick up their children. And what happened is that they obtained exactly the opposite result, because parents, thought that this was a way to pay for extra childcare. So you see, I think it really depends on the context, and there's not an answer, like a definite answer to this question, because I still, being a behavioral economist, I still believe that green taxes and monetary incentives can and have to play a role in this battle. I don't know if you want to add anything
No,
here.
I agree. It's a menu of items
Yeah.
to use. What I would say is that the least explored is most probably the nudge area, the behaviour change. It's interesting. I talked to many colleagues. Westminster are very enlightened, actually, to be looking at behaviour change. Many local authorities are not. Don't have that really high on their agenda. They recognise the need to do it. It usually focuses around recycling and maximising recycling uptake. It's a little bit about energy efficiency, but not much elsewhere. The Innovation Unit in London do a fair bit of work on what's called ethnographic research. And that's another area that's really, I think, is really important, where you actually live within and study and observe and live with people within a community to find out their day-to-day decisions and what is it that influences those decisions. I remember doing something with Tower Hamlets around with Food for Life around, they accepted the fact that the children in Tower Hamlets that on one day, every day, would buy food from a fast food chicken outlet. And they kind of like given up on it. They knew that that's what people were doing. So day in, day out, every child was at least be buying food from these places. Now, their health effects, of course, are really bad. And these companies were reducing the prices at the time when the children were leaving school as well. So the prices went up again later on. So they were deliberately targeting. So the environmental health teams will say, well, how can we make those meals then healthier? Because if that's where they're going, how do we change the way that they do that? How do we make sure that they use types of potatoes that absorb less fat? How do we get them to reduce the portion size? How do we get them to put healthy, fresh salad and things with the meals? So it's kind of taking a view as recognizing where people are coming from and trying to adapt that situation to something more positive. I think that's another thing that it's politically quite difficult. That's quite a difficult decision to make. You're kind of accepting the fact that that is happening and most probably going to be difficult to change. And similarly, I remember in Haringey, there were actually teachers that used to escort the kids to the fast food outlets to make sure they were safe. I mean, that was amazing. We actually played videos back to the staff at Haringey and said, well, that's what you're doing. That's your policy. Now, I understand that, but what do you do about it? So I think there's some things around understanding where people are coming from and trying to use and adapt to that and understand that.
I'm conscious of time, so if you don't mind, I think we should probably close this panel discussion. That's what happens when you are particularly interested in a topic. We are running out of time. So, so before we leave, let me just thank the panelists for taking the time to participate in this panel discussion. Thank you. You brought very interesting discussion today about nudge theory and how to change individuals' behavior. I also want to thank the economics department at Warwick and the Institute for Engagement for supporting and sponsoring the event. And I also want to thank my colleagues, Bojana Beauclair and Maxine Tucker and James Brown for helping with the organization of the event. And last but not least, I want to thank the audience for your participation in person and online. Thank you very much for joining us. And can we just give an applause to the panelists today? Thanks.